the 15th chapter of the 6th canto of the Srimad Bagavatam and the 16th chapter as well. And this is not the conclusion. There's still another chapter to go after this for the life and times of King Citraketu, who was visited by the Supreme Lord personally, and he saw God face to face. So it's a very serious incarnation of God that came to bless him, and it was quite wonderful. So in the previous chapter, which would have been, of course, chapter 14, was King Ketu's lamentation because of the death of his son. You might remember his son died, and he had no children. He had a lot of wives, but he had no children. So he finally met Angira, the great sage Angira, just to catch you up in case you need to have a little reminder. And Angira blessed him with a son because that's what he asked for. And then Angira left immediately, didn't discuss it further. He did say, however, that your son will bring you great joy and great lamentation. And then he left. He didn't discuss it further. So the idea is this son was born, and it was very wonderful, but all the wives became very jealous of the one wife who had the son. And they poisoned the boy, and the boy died. And it was the ruination of everyone. They had all fallen out. The father literally died almost himself. He was laying next to the boy like a dead man on the floor. The mother would wake up and then pass out again, and wake up and pass out from the pain and the suffering and the attachment to the boy. The whole kingdom was ruined, and were just completely miserable about the death of the young prince. So this is where Narada comes back, and he actually brings the boy back to life. Now, I'm not going to tell you anything else because we're getting ready to read this, but I got to tell you, it's some of the best reading you'll ever get. It doesn't matter if you like any kind of reading. This would be very, very enlightening for you, but it's also difficult to digest because the hard truth about our situation in the material world, material body, attachments for these material forms, which are endlessly mutable, and we constantly lose everything that we have over and over and over again. So the conclusion is to become desireless materially, but full of desire spiritually. So keep that in mind. And we'll start out by offering our respects to the spiritual master. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Paristaya Bhutile Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharini Nirvishesha Shinyavari Paschachari Shitarane. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Shirvarigadhar Shiva Sri Gauravakta Vrinda Hari Krishna 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 Hari Hari Hare Ram 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 Hari Hari. So very good. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, so now we'll start, and if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and get this going. We have 2 chapters tonight, a total of a little over 90, almost 100 verses. So whoever wants to read, please be prepared to take 15 or 20 verses. Okay, I'll start with text 1. Sri Sukadeva Goswami said, while King Citraketu, overcome by lamentation, lay like a dead body at the side of the dead body of his son, the 2 great sages, Narada and Angira, instructed him about spiritual consciousness as follows. Text 2. O king, what relationship does the dead body for which you lament have with you? And what relationship do you have with him? You may say that you are now related as father and son, but do you think this relationship existed before? Does it truly exist now? Or will it continue in the future? O king, as small particles of sand sometimes come together and are sometimes separated due to the force of the waves, The living entities who have accepted material bodies sometimes come together and are sometimes separated by force of time. When seeds are sown in the ground, they sometimes grow into plants and sometimes do not. Sometimes the ground is not fertile, and the sowing of the seeds is unproductive. Similarly, sometimes a prospective father, being impelled by the potency of the Supreme Lord, can beget a child, but sometimes conception does not take place. Therefore, one should not lament over the artificial relationship of parenthood, which is ultimately controlled by the Supreme Lord. O King, both you and we, your advisors, wives, and ministers, as well as everything moving and non-moving throughout the entire cosmos at this time, are in a temporary situation. Before our birth, this situation did not exist. And after our death, it will exist no longer. Therefore, our situation now is temporary, although it is not false. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, the master and proprietor of everything, is certainly not interested in the temporary cosmic manifestation. Nonetheless, just as a boy at the beach creates something in which he is not interested in, the Lord, keeping everything under his control, causes creation, maintenance, and annihilation. He creates by engaging a father to beget a son. He maintains by engaging a government or king to see to the public's welfare. And he annihilates through the agents for killing, such as snakes, etc. The agents for creation, maintenance, and annihilation have no independent potency, but because of the spell of the illusory energy, one thinks himself the creator, maintainer, and annihilator. As from one seed another seed is generated, O King, so from one body, the body of a father, through the body of the mother, a third body is generated, the body of a son. As the elements of the material body are eternal, the living entity who appears through these material elements is also eternal. Divisions of generalization and specifications, such as nationality, individuality, are imaginations of persons who are not advanced in knowledge. Sri Sukadeva Goswami continued, thus enlightened by the instructions of Narada and Angira, King Citraketu became hopeful with knowledge. Wiping his shriveled face with his hand, the king began to speak. King Citraketu said, "You have both come here dressed like avaduts, liberated persons, just to cover your identities. But I see that of all men, you are the most elevated in awareness. You know everything as it is. Therefore, you are the greatest of all personalities. Brahmanas, who are exalted in the position of Vaishnavas, the most dear servants of Krishna, sometimes dress like madmen, just to benefit materialists like us, who are always attached to sense gratification. And just to dispute our ignorance, the Vaishnavas wander on the surface of the globe according to their desires." So who would like to pick it up there? Anyone like to grab this at text 12?
Okay, I can grab it.
All right then.
Okay.
Is that
Go.
okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Take about
Can you hear
15.
me?
Yeah, take about 15 verses if you don't mind.
Okay, so till 27.
Something like that.
O great souls, I have heard that among the great and perfect persons wandering the surface of the earth to instruct knowledge to people covered by ignorance are Sanat Kumar, Narada, Ribhu, Angira, Deval, Asita, Apantaratama, Vyasadev, Markandeya, Gautama, Vashishta, Bhagavan Parashuram, Kapila, Shukadev, Durvasa, Yajnavalkya, Jatukarna, and Aruni. Others are Romasha, Chavana, Dattatreya, Asri, Patanjali, the great sage Dhaumya, who is like the head of the Vedas, the sage Panchashikha, Hiranyanabha, Kaushalya, Shrutadev, and Ritadvaja. You must certainly be among them. Because you are great personalities, you can give me real knowledge. I am as foolish as a village animal like a pig or dog, because I am merged in the darkness of ignorance. Therefore, please ignite the torch of knowledge to save me. Angira said, My dear king, when you desired to have a son, I approached you. Indeed, I am the same Angira Rishi who gave you this son. As for this Rishi, he is the great sage Narada, the direct son of Lord Brahma. My dear king, you are an advanced devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. To be absorbed in lamentation for the loss of something material is unsuitable for a person like you. Therefore, we have both come to relieve you from this false lamentation, which is due to your being merged in the darkness of ignorance. For those who are advanced in spiritual knowledge, to be affected by material loss and gain is not at all desirable. When I first came to your home, I could have given you the supreme transcendental knowledge. But when I saw that your mind was absorbed in material things, I gave you only a son, who caused you jubilation and lamentation. My dear king, now you are actually experiencing the misery of a person who has sons and daughters. O king, owner of the state of Shurasena, one's wife, his house, the opulence of his kingdom, and his various other opulences and objects of sense perception are all the same in that they are temporary. One's kingdom, military power, treasury, servants, ministers, friends, and relatives are all causes of fear, illusion, lamentation, and distress. They are like a Gandharva Nagara, a non-existent palace that one imagines to exist in the forest. Because they are impermanent, they are no better than illusions, dreams, and mental concoctions. These visible objects like wife, children, and property are like dreams and mental concoctions. Actually, what we see has no permanent existence. It is sometimes seen and sometimes not. Only because of our past actions do we create such mental concoctions, and because of these concoctions, we perform further activities. The living entity in the bodily conception of life is absorbed in the body, which is a combination of the physical elements, the five senses for gathering knowledge, and the five senses of action, along with the mind. Through the mind, the living entity suffers three kinds of tribulations: adhibhautika, adhidaivika, and adhyatmika. Therefore, this body is a source of all miseries. Therefore, O King Citraketu, carefully consider the position of the Atma. In other words, try to understand who you are, whether body, mind, or soul. Consider where you have come from, where you are going, and after giving up this body, where you are going after giving up this body, and why you are under the control of material lamentation. Try to understand your real position in this way, and then you will be able to give up your unnecessary attachment. You will also be able to give up the belief that this material world, anything not directly in touch with the service of Krishna, is eternal. Thus you will obtain peace. The great sage Narada continued, My dear king, attentively receive from me a mantra, which is most auspicious. After accepting it from me, in 7 nights you will be able to see the Lord face to face. That was 15 verses.
But read the last verse, though. There's only one more.
Oh, okay. Oh, there's only one. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. My dear king, in former days, Lord Shiva and other demigods took shelter of the lotus feet of Sankarshan. Thus, they immediately got free from the illusion of duality and achieved unequaled and unsurpassed glories in spiritual life. You will very soon attain that very same position.
Beautiful. Thank you. That's wonderful. And that takes us to chapter 16. King Citraketu meets the Supreme Lord. And then we want to go ahead and pick up the reading from there. So whoever would like to go next, you can start with text 1.
Bhavananda wants to go.
Okay.
Text 1. Sri Sukadev Goswami said, My dear King
Parikshit,
by his mystic power, the great sage Narada brought the dead son into the vision of all the lamentating relatives, and then spoke as follows. Sri Narada Muni said, O living entity, all good fortune unto you. Just see your father and mother. All your friends and relatives are overwhelmed with grief because of your passing away. Because you died untimely, the balance of your lifetime still remains. Therefore, you may re-enter your body and enjoy the remainder of your life, surrounded by your friends and relatives, except the royal throne and all the opulences given by your father. By the mystic power of Narada Muni, the living entity re-entered his dead body for a short time and spoke in reply to Narada Muni's request. He said, according to the results of my fruitive activities, I, the living being, transmigrated from one body to another, sometimes going into the species of the demigods, sometimes into the species of lower animals, sometimes among the vegetables, and sometimes to the human species. Therefore, in which birth were these my mother and father? No one is actually my mother and father. How can I accept these two people as my parents? My page, there we go. In this material world, which advances like a river that carries away the living entity, all people become friends, relatives, and enemies in due course of time. They also act neutrally. They meditate, they despise one another, and they act in many other relationships. Nonetheless, despite these various transactions, no one is permanently related. Just as gold and other commodities are eventually transferred from one place to another in due course of purchase and sale, so the living entity, as a result of his fruitive activities, wanders throughout the entire universe, being injected into various bodies in different species of life by one kind of father and mother. A few living entities are born in the human species, and others are born as animals. Although both are living entities, their relationships are impermanent. An animal may remain in the custody of a human being for some time, and then the same animal may be transferred into the possession of other human beings. As soon as the animal goes away, the former proprietor no longer has a sense of ownership. As long as the animal is in his possession, he certainly has an affinity for it. But as soon as the animal is sold, the affinity is lost. Even though one living entity becomes connected with another because of a relationship based on bodies that are perishable, the living entity is eternal. Actually, it is the body that is born or lost, not the living entity. One should not accept that the living entity takes birth or dies. The living entity actually has no relationship with so-called fathers and mothers. As long as he appears as a son of a certain father and mother as a result of his past fruitive activities, he has a connection with the body given by that father and mother. Thus, he falsely accepts himself as their son and acts affectionately. After he dies, however, the relationship is finished. Under such circumstances, one should not be falsely involved with jubilation or lamentation. The living entity is eternally and imperishable because he actually has no beginning and no end. He never takes birth or dies. He is the basic principle of all types of bodies, yet he does not belong to the bodily category. The living being is so sublime that he is equal in quality to the Supreme Lord. Nonetheless, because he is extremely small, he is prone to be illusioned by the external energy, and thus he creates various bodies for himself according to his different desires. For this living entity, no one is dear, nor is anyone unfavorable. He makes no distinction between that which is his own and that which belongs to anyone else. He is one without a second. In other words, he is not affected by friends and enemies, well-wishers, or mischief mongers. He is only an observer, a witness of different qualities of men. The Supreme Lord, Atma, the creator of cause and effect, does not accept the happiness and distress that result from fruitive actions. He is completely independent of having to accept material and bodily, and because he has no material body, he is always neutral. The living entities, being part and parcel of the Lord, possess his qualities in a minute quantity. Therefore, one should not be affected by lamentation. Sri Sukadeva Goswami continued. When the conditioned soul, Shiva, in the form of Maharaj
Citraketu.
Chakitu's son had spoken in this way and then left. Citraketu and the other relatives of the dead son were all astonished. Thus they cut off shackles of their own affection, which was due to their relationship with him, and gave up their lamentation. After the relatives had discharged their duties by performing the proper funeral ceremonies and burning the dead child's body, they gave up the affection that leads to illusion, lamentation, fear, and pain. Such affection is undoubtedly difficult to give up, but they gave it up easily. Queen Chaduti's co-wives, who had poisoned the child, were very much ashamed, and they lost all their bodily luster while lamenting. O king, they remembered the instructions of Agriya and gave up their ambition to bear children. Following the directions of the Brahmanas, they went to the banks of the Yamuna, where they bathed and atoned for their sinful activities.
Okay.
Thus enlightened by the instructions of the Brahmas, Agira and Narada, King Citraketu, thus fully aware of the spiritual knowledge, as an elephant becomes free from the muddy reservoir of water, King Citraketu came out of the dark well of family life. The king bathed in the water of the Yamuna, and according to prescribed duties, he offered obligations of water to the forefathers. Oblations of water to the forefathers and demigods. Very gravely controlling his senses and mind, he then offered his respects and obeisances to the sons of Brahma, Agira and Narada. Someone want to pick it up?
Yeah,
Need
pick
to
it up.
pick up since I've got it switched on.
Okay.
Okay. Save this. Right. Number 17.
Yeah.
Thereafter, being very much pleased with Citraketu, who was a self-controlled devotee and surrendered soul, Narada, the most powerful sage, spoke to him the following transcendental instructions. Narada gave Citraketu the following mantra: O Lord, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, who are addressed by the Omkara, Pranava, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. O Lord Vasudev, I meditate upon you. O Lord Pradumna, Lord Aniruddha, and Lord Sankasham, I offer my respectful obeisances. O reservoir of spiritual potency, O supreme bliss, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you who are self-sufficient and most peaceful. O ultimate truth, one without a second, who are realized as Brahma, Paramatma, Bhagavan, and are therefore the reservoir of all knowledge, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Perceiving your personal bliss, you are always transcendental to the waves of material nature. Therefore, my Lord, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. You are the supreme controller of the senses, and your expansions of form are unlimited. You are the greatest, and therefore I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. The words and mind of the conditioned soul cannot approach the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for material names and forms are not applicable to the Lord, who is entirely spiritual beyond the conception of gross and subtle forms. The impersonal Brahman is another of his forms. May he, by his pleasure, protect us. As pots made completely of earth are situated on earth after being created, and are transformed into earth again when broken, this cosmic manifestation is caused by the Supreme Brahman, situated in the Supreme Brahman, and annihilated in the Supreme Brahman. Therefore, since the Supreme Lord is the cause of Brahman, let us offer him our respectful obeisances. The Supreme Brahman emanates from the Supreme Personality of Godhead and expands like the sky. Although untouched by anything material, it exists within and without. Nonetheless, the mind, intelligence, senses, and living forces can neither touch him nor know him. I offer unto him my respectful obeisances. An iron has the power to burn when made red hot in the association of fire. So the body, senses, living force, mind, intelligence, although merely lumps of matter, can function in their activities when infused with the particles of consciousness by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As iron cannot burn unless heated by fire, the bodily senses cannot act unless favored by the Supreme Brahman. O Transcendental Lord, who are situated in the topmost planet of the spiritual world, your two lotus feet are always massaged by the multitude of the best devotees with their lotus bud hands. You are the Supreme Personality of Godhead, complete in 6 opulences. You are the Supreme Person mentioned in the Purusha Sukta prayers. You are the most perfect self-realized master of all mystic power. Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Sri Sukadev Goswami continued, Narada, having become the spiritual master of Citraketu, instructed him fully in this prayer because Citraketu was fully surrendered. O King Parikshit, Narada then left with the great sage Angira for the topmost planet known as Brahma Loka. Fasting and drinking only water, Citraketu for 1 week continuously chanted with great care and attention the mantra given by Narada Muni. O King Parikshit, after only 1 week of repeatedly practicing the mantra received from the spiritual master, Citraketu achieved the rule of the planet of the Vidyadharas as an intermediate product of his spiritual advancement in knowledge. Thereafter, within a very few days, by the influence of the mantra that Citraketu had practiced, his mind became increasingly enlightened in spiritual progress, and he attained shelter at the lotus feet of Anantadev. Upon reaching the shelter of Lord Sesha, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Citraketu saw that he was as white as the white fibers of a lotus flower. He was dressed in bluish garments and adorned with a brilliantly glittering helmet, armlets, belt, and bangles. His face was smiling and his eyes were reddish. He was surrounded by such exalted, liberated persons as Sanat Kumara. As soon as Maharaj Citraketu saw the Supreme Lord, he was cleansed of all material contamination and situated in his original Krishna consciousness, being completely purified. He became silent and grave, and because of love for the Lord, tears fell from his eyes and his hairs stood on end. With great devotion and love, he offered his respectful obeisances unto the original personality of Godhead. With tears of love and affection, Citraketu repeatedly moistened the resting place of the Supreme Lord's lotus feet. Because his voice was choked in ecstasy, for a considerable time he was unable to utter any of the letters of the alphabet to offer the Lord suitable prayers. Thereafter, by controlling his mind with his intelligence and thus restricting his senses from external engagements, he recovered suitable words with which to express his feelings. Thus he began to offer prayers to the Lord, who is the personification of the Holy Scriptures, the Satvata Samhitas, like the Brahma Samhita and the Narada Pancharatra, and who is the spiritual master of all. He offered his prayers as follows.
Very good.
Someone else then?
Yeah, if somebody else wants to read, they can now. That was really good.
Yes, I can read.
Oh, very nice. Thank you. Text
Okay.
34.
Text 34.
Right.
Citraketu said, O unconquerable Lord, although you cannot be conquered by anyone, you are certainly conquered by devotees who have control of the mind and senses. They can keep you under their control because you are causelessly merciful to devotees who desire no material profit from you. Indeed, you give yourself to them, and because of this, you also have full control over your devotees. My dear Lord, this cosmic manifestation and its creation, maintenance and annihilation are all but your opulences. Since Lord Brahma and the other creators are nothing but small portions of a portion of you, their partial power to create does not make them God, Ishvara. Their consciousness of themselves as separate lords is therefore merely false prestige. It is not valid. You exist in the beginning, middle, and end of everything. From the most minute particle of the cosmic manifestation, the atoms, to the gigantic universes and total material energy. Nonetheless, you are eternal, having no beginning, end, or middle. You are perceived to exist in these three phases, and thus you are permanent. When the cosmic manifestation does not exist, you exist as the original potency. Every universe is covered by 7 layers: earth, water, fire, air, sky, the total energy, and false ego, each 10 times greater than the previous one. There are innumerable universes besides this one, and although they are unlimitedly large, they move about like atoms in you. Therefore, you are called unlimited. O Lord, O Supreme, unintelligent persons who thirst for sense enjoyment and who worship various demigods are no better than animals in the human form of life. Because of their animalistic propensities, they fall to worship your lordship, and instead they worship the insignificant demigods, who are but small sparks of your glory. With the destruction of the entire universe, including the demigods, the benedictions received from the demigods also vanish, just like the nobility when a king is no longer in power. O Supreme Lord, if persons obsessed with material desire for sense gratification through material opulence worship you, who are the source of all knowledge and are transcendental to material qualities, they are not subject to material rebirth. Just as sterilized or fried seeds do not produce plants, living entities are subjected to the repetition of birth and death because they are conditioned by material nature. But since you are transcendental, one who is inclined to associate with you in transcendence escapes the conditions of material nature. O unconquerable one, when you spoke about Bhagavad Dharma, which is the uncontaminated religious system for achieving the shelter of your lotus feet, that was your victory. Persons who have no material desires, like the Kumaras, who are self-satisfied sages, worship you to be liberated from material contamination. In other words, they accept the process of Bhagavad Dharma to achieve shelter at your lotus feet. Being full of contradictions, all forms of religion, but Bhagavad Dharma work under conceptions of fruitive reserves and distinctions of you and I, and yours and mine. The followers of Srimad Bhagavatam have no such consciousness. They are all Krishna conscious, thinking that they are Krishna's and Krishna is theirs. There are other low-class religious systems which are contemplated for the killing of enemies or the gain of mystic power, but such religious systems, being full of passion and envy, are impure and temporary. Because they are full of envy, they are full of irreligion. How can a religious system that produces envy of oneself and of others be beneficial for oneself and for them? What is auspicious about following such a system? What is actually to be gained by causing pain to one's own self due to self-envy and by causing pain to others? One arouses your anger and practices irreligion. My dear Lord, one's occupational duty is instructed in Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita according to your point of view, which never deviates from the highest goal of life. Those who follow their occupational duties under your supervision, being equal to all living entities, moving and unmoving, and not considering high and low, are called Aryans. Such Aryans worship you, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. My Lord, it is impossible for one to be immediately freed from all material contamination by seeing you, not to speak of seeing you personally, merely by hearing the holy name of your Lordship only once. Even Chandalas, men of the lowest class, are freed from all material contamination. Under the circumstances, you will not be freed from material contamination simply by seeing you. Therefore, my dear Lord, simply seeing you has now wiped away all the contamination of sinful activities and the results of material attachment and lusty desires, which always filled my mind and the burn of my heart. Whatever is predicted by the great sage Narada Muni cannot be otherwise. In other words, I have obtained your audience as a result of being trained by Narada Muni. You want to read more? You want me to read?
Let's see. Is there anybody else that would like to read too? We have about 20 more verses to go.
Oh, you want to read? Okay. Anybody else?
Anybody else? Does anybody else wants to read?
I'll continue reading.
Okay.
Okay.
Text 46. O unlimited Supreme Personality of Godhead, whatever living entity does in this material world is well known to you, because you are the Supersoul. In the presence of the sun, there is nothing to be revealed by the light of a glowworm. Similarly, because you know everything, in your presence there is nothing for me to make known. My dear Lord, you are the creator, maintainer, and annihilator of this cosmic manifestation. But persons who are too materialistic and who always see separateness do not have eyes with which to see you. They cannot understand your real position, and therefore they conclude that the cosmic manifestation is independent of your opulence. My Lord, you are the supreme pure, and you are full in all six opulences. Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. My dear Lord, it is after you endeavor that Lord Brahma, Indra, and the other directors of the cosmic manifestation become occupied with their activities. It is after you perceive the material energy, my Lord, that the senses begin to perceive. The Supreme Personality of Godhead holds all the universes on his heads like seeds of mustard. I offer my respectful obeisances unto you, that Supreme Personality who has thousands of hoods. Shukadev Goswami continued, the Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Anantadev, being very much pleased with the prayers offered by Citraketu, the king of the Vidyadharas, replied to him as follows. O best of the Kuru dynasty, Maharaj Parikshit, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Anantadev, replied as follows. O king, as a result of your having accepted the instructions spoken about me by the great sages Narada and Angira, you have become completely aware of transcendental knowledge. Because you are now educated in the spiritual science, you have seen me face to face. Therefore, you are now completely perfect. All living entities, moving and non-moving, are my expansions and are separate from me. I am the supersoul of all living beings who exist because I manifest them. I am the form of the transcendental vibrations like Omkar and Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, and I am the supreme absolute truth. These two forms of mine, namely the transcendental sound and the eternally blissful spiritual form of the deity, are my eternal forms. They are not material. In this world of matter, which the conditioned soul accepts as consisting of enjoyable resources, the conditioned soul expands, thinking that he is the enjoyer of the material world. Similarly, the material world expands in the living entity as a source of enjoyment. In this way, they both expand, but because they are my energies, they are both pervaded by me. As the Supreme Lord, I am the cause of these effects, and one should know that both of them rest in me. When a person is in deep sleep, he dreams and sees in himself many other objects, such as great mountains and rivers, or perhaps even the entire universe, although they are far away. Sometimes when one awakens from a dream, he sees that he is in a human form, lying in his bed in one place. Then he sees himself, in terms of various conditions, as belonging to a particular nationality, family, and so on. All the conditions of deep sleep, dreaming, and wakefulness are but energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One should always remember the original creator of these conditions, the Supreme Lord, who is unaffected by them. Know me to be the Supreme Brahman, the all-pervading Supersoul, through whom the sleeping living entity can understand his dreaming condition and his happiness beyond the activities of the material senses. That is to say, I am the cause of the activities of the sleeping living being. If one's dreams during sleep are merely subject matters witnessed by the Supersoul, How can the living entity, who is different from the supersoul, remember the activities of dreams? The experiences of one person cannot be understood by another. Therefore, the knower of the facts, the living entity who inquires into the incidents manifested in dreams and wakefulness, is different from the circumstantial activities. That knowing factor is Brahman. In other words, the quality of knowing belongs to the living entities and to the Supreme Soul. Thus, the living entity can also experience the activities of dreams and wakefulness. In both stages, the knower is unchanged, but is qualitatively one with the Supreme Brahman. When a living entity, thinking himself different from me, forgets his spiritual identity of qualitative oneness with me in eternity, knowledge, and bliss, his material conditional life begins. In other words, instead of identifying his interest with mine, he becomes interested in his bodily expansions like his wife, children, and material possessions. In this way, by the influence of his actions, one body comes from another, and after one death, another death takes place. How are we doing? Should I stop here and somebody else can take over?
If somebody else would like, there's only about 7 more verses. 7 or 8.
I can read some more if you'd like.
If you want to, sure. You haven't been here. We got to make you make up.
Yeah, that's right.
Rama Raghav was taking your place last time. He read extra, so need to thank him.
A human being can attain perfection in life by self-realization through the Vedic literature and its practical application. This is possible especially for a human being born in India, the land of piety. A man who obtains birth in such a convenient position but does not understand his self is unable to achieve the highest perfection, even if he is exalted to life in the higher planetary systems. Remembering the great trouble found in the field of activities performed for fruitive results, and remembering how one receives the reverse of the results one desires, whether from material actions or from the fruitive activities recommended in the Vedic literatures, an intelligent man should cease from the desire for fruitive action. For by such endeavors, one cannot achieve the ultimate goal of life. On the other hand, if one acts without desires for fruitive results, in other words, if one engages in devotional activities, he can achieve the highest goal of life with freedom from material, miserable conditions. Considering this, one should cease from material desires. As husband and wife, a man and woman, plan together to attain happiness and decrease unhappiness, working jointly in many ways, but because their activities are full of desires, these activities are never a source of happiness, and they never diminish distress. On the contrary, they are cause of great unhappiness. One should understand that the activities of persons who are proud of their material experience bring only results contradictory to those such persons conceive while awake, sleeping, and deeply sleeping. One should further understand that the spirit soul, although very difficult for the materialist to perceive, is above all these conditions, and by the strength of one's discrimination, one should give up the desire for fruitive results in the present life and in the next. Thus, becoming experienced in transcendental knowledge, one should become my devotee. Persons who try to reach the ultimate goal of life must expertly observe the Supreme Absolute Person and the living entity, who are one in quality in their relationship as part and whole. This is the ultimate understanding of life. There is no better truth than this. O kin, if you accept this conclusion of mine, being unattached to material enjoyment, adhering to me with great faith, and thus becoming proficient and fully aware of knowledge and its practical application in life. You will achieve the highest perfection by attaining me. Sri Sukadeva Goswami continued, after thus instructing Citraketu and assuring him of perfection in this way, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the Supreme Spiritual Master, the Supreme Soul Sankarshan, disappeared from that place as Citraketu looked on.
All right. Wow. That's pretty serious business, don't you think, guys?
Yep.
That's the real deal. So anybody have any comments or any questions or any illuminations or anything that stood out particularly that you want to bring light to?
In the first chapter that we read there, about verse 4 or 5, when his son is which mother and father are you? I've had so many. I'm in this human life, I've had a lot of mother and fathers. In this animal lives, I've had lots of mothers and fathers. And in vegetable life, I've had lots of mothers and fathers. And then he proceeded to die. After that, he wasn't concerned about, although his parents said, look, we're going to give you a throne, we're going to give you all this opulence and all this power and money. He wasn't interested at all, wasn't interested. So he just just died again. And I thought that was really interesting. And I wish I could realize it a little bit, because it's so easy to be attached to the family that we have now, our friends and our work colleagues and all this and that, all these relationships we have, but they really don't matter. They're just so small and insignificant in the scheme of things, with all the friends we've had in the past, all the parents and relatives and everything else that we've had in the past. This is just one tiny little speck of it.
Well, that's they do matter. Just like it said, this is temporary, but it's not. In other words, it's still real. I mean, it's an illusion, but it's temporary. Okay. So whatever you do, whatever actions you do, that either culminates for you as your karma for another birth, or if it's an act in Krishna consciousness, it's meritorious towards your return back to the spiritual sky. So everything we do does matter, and all the people do matter. But in the greater scheme of things, we shouldn't have anybody that's particularly matters or that doesn't particularly matter, other than, of course, the spiritual master, Krishna, and the Vaishnava devotees. Because to become desireless means to be emptied of all material desires, but not of all spiritual desires. We have unlimited spiritual desires. Therefore, the spiritual world is full of desire trees and touchstone, so that whatever you desire to serve the Lord will be available to you to offer in the most wonderful way. So that's the idea. But it's a very good point, because Prabhupada made a statement. He said, where are they now? The list of names. You remember the list of names? Prabhupada quoted that. And he was talking about all his teachers, all of his friends, all of his, all these people, even his family members. He said, they're all just a list of names now. Because Prabhupada had gone to the Western world. No one thought he could do any good. Even, what's her name at the Skandia steamship line, Mother, I can't think of her name right now.
Srimati Mukherjee.
Srimati Mukherjee, you're right. So she didn't even think that he could accomplish anything. She told him, she said, you're an old man. What do you expect to accomplish? Well, you just go there and die amongst these people? That's what she told him. She was very concerned about him leaving. She did not want him to leave, but she said he was insistent. So being insistent on serving the Lord is the real secret here, isn't it? That's actually Bhagavat Dharma. That's actually Bhagavat Dharma. is being insistent that everything we offer, everything we give away, everything that we eat first, we take into consideration giving it back to Krishna. That's true sacrifice. Now, they had Ashvamedha sacrifices, they had all different types of sacrifices in the Vedic culture, and everything was brought together in one place, offered to the Lord by all the priests in wonderful ways. All the citizens got to participate. And then after it became prasadam of the mercy of God, it was disseminated to the citizens. So everybody had everything they needed. There was no need for stealing, crime of any kind. Everybody had all they wanted. So, but a very good point, Raghavati, and I can understand what you mean by that, but we also want to be aware that every action has an opposite and equal reaction. So be careful. Everybody matters. All right. So what you got? Rama Raghava, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I wanted to share a few things. I took notes of several places. I really like when Srila Prabhupada mentions things that are still relevant in this day, because his purports are full of so many relevant informations. There's one in text 14, chapter 16, text 14, where he talks about killing children, killing babies. So I'd like to share that purport with everyone. It says in this verse, the word Bala Hatya Hata Prabha is to be particularly noted. The practice of killing children has existed in human society for a long time, since time immemorial. But in the days of yore, it was very rarely performed. At the present moment, however, in this age of Kali, abortion, killing of the child within the womb, has become very common, and sometimes the child is even killed after birth. If a woman performs such an abominable act, she gradually loses all her bodily luster. Bala Hatya Hata Pravaha. It is also to be noted that the ladies who had committed the sinful act of administering poison to the child were very much ashamed, and according to the directions of the Brahmanas, they had to undergo atonement for killing the child. Any woman who has ever performed such an infamously sinful act must atone for it, but no one now is doing that. Under the circumstances, the women responsible must suffer in this life and the next. Those who are sincere souls, after hearing this incident, should refrain from such child killing and should atone for their sinful activities by taking to Krishna consciousness very seriously. If one chants the Hare Krishna Mahamantra without offenses, all of one's sinful actions are surely atoned for immediately, but one should not commit such deeds again, for that is an offense. And if you'll bear with me, I had a couple of other things, and then I had a question also. Also in text 26 of the same chapter, Srila Prabhupada explains how in this case, Angira did not instruct Citraketu about devotional service because he wasn't ready for it. He was too attached to material things. So sometimes when we're telling people about Krishna consciousness, we have to understand that some people might not be ready for it. So if they're insistent on if they're not really interested in devotional service or in Krishna consciousness, we just have to give them some time, and maybe later on when they get knocked around by material life, they might become more motivated, and that's the time to approach them. And also in verse 43, because in Srila Prabhupada's books, the word Aryan is mentioned, and sometimes that has a bad connotation nowadays. Here's one very relevant portion for us to know also. The members of human society who strictly follow the principles of Bhagavata Dharma and live according to the instructions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are called Aryans or Arya. A civilization of Aryans who strictly follow the instructions of the Lord and never deviate from those instructions is perfect. Such civilized men do not discriminate between trees, animals, human beings, and other living entities. Pandita Samadarshina. Because they are completely educated in Krishna consciousness, they see all living beings equally. Aryans do not kill even a small plant unnecessarily, not to speak of cutting trees for sense gratification. So we should know that, because sometimes that people might say this is, you know, the Germans had this wrong conception about Aryan civilization, but they were discriminating against a different race of human beings. So that's not really Aryan.
Plus, they had the swastika, but it was turned upside down.
Yeah, yeah, that. Yeah.
I
And
don't
then
get the idea how bad off they were. Yeah.
the question I had was in verse 42, it mentions envy of oneself. So I wasn't sure what that means, envy of oneself.
Well, you know, there's three kinds of miseries: adi bodhika, adi atmika, and adi devika. So there are miseries caused by oneself, by the demigods, by nature itself, like that, hurricanes, earthquakes, like that, and in one's own actions. So self-envy means to act in a way that is against your best interest. So if you act for sense gratification, that's self-envy, because you're hurting yourself. You're thinking that you want to take from yourself something that you want to possess, and by taking it, you're actually committing harm to yourself. It said this actually evokes the anger of the Lord when he sees that. We were reading that a moment ago, that the Lord becomes angry when he sees someone engaged in harmful activities, not only for themselves, but for others. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then you had was that the question?
Yeah, that was the question.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's good. Now, all those are wonderful illuminations, man. I appreciate you you doing that. You know, as I was going through, there's about 25 verses I'd like to go back and go over. I know we don't have time, so we're not going to do it. But, you know, in our life, these points that you're making, particularly Rama Raghava Prabhuji, is that you are making points that are relevant to today's politics. You're making points today's. These are just as relevant today. They're on the docket. They're on the ticket. They're on what are people are voting for. So this is so important that this information that you just gave, which was extracted from this beautiful Bhagavatam and the purports therein, you know, is disseminated widely to the general mass of public, because otherwise they're acting in self-envy. See, they want to have sex life and they want to enjoy that because that's something that the sense gratification. But when the baby comes, no, we don't want to cut it out. Yeah, well, we're just trying to have some fun here. So what's this Krishna doing making this baby? Doesn't he not know that I didn't want a baby? You see what I'm saying? I mean, you know, this is the attitude of the general population. They've lost all compass on how to act. They're not hearing these discourses, and that's the problem. So text 63, it says, persons who try to reach the ultimate goal of life must expertly observe the supreme absolute person and the living entity in relationship, who are one in quality in their relationship. But this is the ultimate understanding of life, and there's no better truth than this. And later in the next verse, text 64, it said, if you accept the conclusion that I'm giving you, being unattached to material enjoyment and adhering to me with great faith, and thus becoming proficient and fully aware of knowledge and its practical application in your life, you will achieve the highest perfection by attaining me. Now, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita in that regard that those persons who know the nature of my appearance, my activities, my birth, do not, upon leaving the material body, take birth again in the material world, but attain to my eternal abode, O Arjuna. Of this, there's no doubt. So this, he's confirming. There's so many verses like that we went through. I counted about 6 or 8 that Krishna confirmed in Bhagavad Gita directly, almost verbatim, as what we just read over these last 2 chapters. We could go over every one of them, but I don't think we have time to do that. So just a few points that I wanted to make. If anybody else have any other question, otherwise I'll go through this pretty quickly, because I'm not gonna get through all this, that's for sure. But here's what I thought of when I read chapter 15, is that the world is temporary but not false. And there's so many philosophies that says that it is false, or that there is void after this existence, or whatever it might be. And we know what those philosophies are. we know why that philosophy was given by Lord Buddha. We understand, follow Buddha. Buddha's God, wanted to stop the violence, taught ahimsa. That's a wonderful thing. But there are other Mayavadi schools and other schools of thought that do not teach this philosophy the way that it's being taught here in Srimad Bhagavatam. We have to be careful about that. And later in the next chapter, he says that these religions are based in envy. They're based in the concept of I and mine. They're based in achieving higher and higher states of sense gratification. Sense gratification is the poison for the soul. Sense gratification guarantees another material body. Sense gratification guarantees suffering. Krishna even said there, it's Ananta speaking, but in the incarnation Ananta, he is telling him, he's saying that that if we can look at the results in our lives that were adverse to our desires. In other words, we got the opposite of what we wanted and we suffered. He said, remember these things. He was talking about this in one of the verses here, Ananta was, when he spoke back to Citraketu. So one of the things that stood out in my mind is that like a boy at a beach, God is not really interested in the material world. It's kind of like a sandcastle that God built, and he's planning on tearing it down. He really doesn't have any real interest in it. And, when we stop and think that, well, Kalki's coming at the end of this millennium and he's going to kill all the rascals that are still left and take them all back home, back to Godhead because they didn't want to go. He's just going to take them anyway. By killing them, that killing of them is the greatest mercy they could ever imagine. They didn't want his mercy and they got it causes. And he got to go home. So in the same way, Krishna is like a little boy at the beach. He's doing this because you want it. He's building this sandcastle out of this endlessly mutable substance, which is eternal, right? But just manifest and unmanifest, manifest, unmanifest like that. But he's not really interested in this. He's interested in one thing. Do we know what it is? Do we know what Krishna is really interested in? Only by undivided devotional service can I be understood as I am standing before you. Only in this way could you ever enter into the mysteries of Krishna's understanding. He says that in Bhagavad Gita. So he doesn't care so much about all this envious religion where people are trying to fame, profit, adoration, and distinction in the material world. To him, it's just a sandcastle that's going to be erased. So all these wonderful, glorious, beautiful things that we see are a spark of God's splendor, no doubt, but they're temporary. And all of these things are being carried out by material nature according to your desires. He goes on to say that nationalities or any kind of image of oneself is really an imagination. It's just our imagination. It's the imagination of uninformed, unintelligent people who don't have the intelligence to know who their true nature is. So Citraketu, when his prayers to Krishna, he said that these two saints, when he said to Angira and Narada, he says, you're coming to me looking like avadutes, like madmen, but I know who you are. You're the most exalted souls in the universe. And then he said, you know everything completely as it is. He said, as it is. Think about it. So Bhagavad Gita, as it is. All these books are as it is. And Angira and Narada were teaching Citraketu transcendental knowledge as it is. So that's a very important point I thought that we should bring out. But he goes on to tell him, he said, I'm like a village animal. I might as well be a pig or a dog. That's what he said. You remember that? Could you imagine Citraketu, one of the most advanced souls in the universe, saying he's like a pig or a dog? That's hard for me to grasp, but this is true humility. So he said he was merged in darkness. So without the training that Narada gave him and the prayers that he gave him, he would not have been able to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead in person. So he said that really this is no better than dreams or material concoctions, everything that you see here now, because it's all temporary. And it's created by material, mental activities and carried out by the three modes of material nature as a person's karma. And the three types of misery, adi bodhika, adi daivika, and adi atmika, we went over. So he said, maybe you should ask yourself, he said this to Citraketu. He said, maybe you should ask yourself who you really are. Why are you here? Why are you under control? Why can you not eliminate this control? Why? He said, how could you obtain peace in that situation? So he said, better you ask yourself these questions, then you could understand your relationship with the Supreme Lord. So in chapter 16, of course, Citraketu is talking to the Supreme Lord in this chapter, and they're dealing about the dead son who was brought back to life, who didn't recognize these people, said he had millions of fathers in all species, like you guys mentioned a minute ago. And he said that they only come together for a short time, and no one is permanently related, not unless we're related in a spiritual sense. So we're being injected into various species, very few humans out of that. And so the soul is a witness of all these different qualities of men. The soul really doesn't have any of these desires. It has the same quality of God as God does, same quality. So it's not really attached to this material world. But once we take a material body and we begin these actions, especially like having, children, you're lighting one candle, it lights the next one, then the next one goes on. This perpetuates itself and creates material bodies. The Lord is neutral because he has no material body. He doesn't have material body, therefore he's neutral. He's not attached to this stuff. And so one has to cut off the shackles of attachment and they gave up their lamentation. They did cut off the shackles, and they gave up their misplaced affection. The wives had to bathe and atone for their sins. They bathed in the Jamuna, by the way, or no, Citraketu bathed in the Jamuna River and offered all his respects to the Lord in the prayer that Narada gave him. And that prayer, he fasted for 7 days, said the prayer, and because of that, he achieved dominion over the planet of the Vidyagaras. So I thought that was pretty important. Only in 1 week is how he did it. This is after Narada and Angira left for Brahmaloka. And it talks about how the Lord, is there and speaking to him beautifully. And there's so many wonderful verses about that. But when we read, if we go back, you've got to read this one. Hang on just a minute. We're gonna try to finish this up as quickly as possible. But I think this is an important verse right here. So this would be verse 31 and 32. And if anybody's got to go, just go. It's okay. I'm just gonna continue recording this for the record anyway. But it says that so he saw God as Lord Shesha, as Ananta, dressed in bluish garments, adorned with brilliantly glittering helmets, armlets, belt, bangles, face smiling. His eyes were a little reddish, surrounded by such exalted, liberated persons he saw. And as soon as Maharaj Citraketu saw the Supreme Lord, he was cleansed of all material contamination and situated in his original Krishna consciousness, being completely purified. And because of the love for the Lord that he had, tears fell from his eyes and his hair stood on end. with great devotion and love are you offered respectful obeisances unto the original personality of Godhead. Tears of love and affection, Citraketu repeatedly moistened the resting place of the Supreme Lord's feet. His voice was choked in ecstasy for a considerable time. He was unable to utter any of the letters of the alphabet to order any suitable prayers to the Lord. So I just think that that's a wonderful commentary that maybe we should take that to bed with us tonight and think about that one as we're praying before we go to sleep, and offer it with heartfelt emotion to the Lord, because that's what the Lord actually is digesting when you're offering foodstuffs. He doesn't need your foodstuffs. He needs your love. And that is what he is tasting. So that's the idea. And if you keep reading, I mean, we could keep reading on all these. I'm not going to do any more, but he says that you're unconquerable. That's a given, but you're being conquered by your devotees. I just love that. The unconquerable is conquered by the devotees who have complete control of their mind and senses. They can keep you under their control because you're causelessly merciful to devotees who desire no material profit from you. So religions that are going to the Lord asking for something all the time that involves their prestige, fame, their profit, their position in the material world, that's material religion based on envy. Okay, so we don't do that. He says here, you give yourselves to them, and because of this, you also have full control over your devotees. Because you give yourself to them, they're totally addicted to the Lord. So, okay. So wonderful prayers. I don't want to do much more, just a couple more little things. When he talks about the demigods, I thought that was a very important point in these chapters, because if you go back and you look at the divisions of faith and so forth, if you think that the demigods don't get their power from God, that's considered to be atheism. In the Bhagavad Gita, that's described by Krishna. So those persons who are going to the demigods, but they don't see that all their powers are coming from God, that is incorrect. And it's very offensive, actually. So I and mine, envy, is the fall of religion. There's nothing to be gained from a religion that's based on envy. But if a person chants the holy name only once, then he's freed from all sin and contamination, if he does it purely. So I think I'm going to end it here, because there's some other things we could do. But one of the things he says that's very, very important is that what happens when a person thinks that he's different than me, his material life starts. In other words, he doesn't identify himself with the Lord's interest, but then he identifies himself with his separate interest from the Lord. And he becomes interested primarily first in wife, home, family, the rest. And then we know where that goes from there. So Krishna is saying at the end of this chapter, Ananta is saying, cease the desire for fruitive assets and activities, because they are the source of your repeated birth and death and your repeated misery. But instead, engage in devotion and achieve the highest position, free from all miseries, in an eternal life of Satchidananda Vigraha, and same quality of God. And because desires separate from the Lord are a great cause of unhappiness. So once he told him to do that, to engage in devotion, and he could achieve the highest position of association with him, the Lord disappeared as Citraketu looked on. So Krishna has a tendency to do that. If you've ever noticed, when he's done talking, he's out of there. He don't stick around for the small talk. All right, guys. Well, listen, y'all are beautiful. Thanks for sticking in here, Rama Raghava Prabhu. Really appreciate it. No, I know it's hard. We've got whole days. Everybody's really busy. but to take time out an hour, hour and a half of your life to hear these wonderful narrations will bring you the ultimate satisfaction in the long run. The rest of the stuff comes and goes. In this endeavor, there's no loss or diminution.
It's the highlight of the week.
It really is, isn't it? I love it. I look forward to it every week. Thank you guys for being so great. And next week, we're going to do this one last chapter. There's another chapter where Citraketu gets himself cursed. I don't know. I don't know if we're going to watch that or not, or read that. But whichever we decide, we'll let you know. So thank you guys so much for everything, and I'm going to go ahead and end the call tonight. Hare Krishna. Jai. Hari Bo.